Hello and welcome. We have a really pertinent and important topic tonight. We're going to be talking about student loan debt. And we're dividing the program really into two parts: how to deal with it if you have a large debt, and most students do, and then how to avoid it. So if you are a teenager or parents of a teen and you're looking forward to college, my guest has some good tips for you. My guest is a returnee. He's a popular guest on the show. Darryl Dahlheimer is back. He is the program director for Lutheran Social Service Financial Counseling, Conquer Your Debt. He is a LICSW social worker and a wonderful resource here in our community that I've called on many times. So I heard, and this was a shocking statistic to me, that in our country, Darryl, we have more student loan debt than we have credit card debt. Now, did I understand that correctly?
I'm sad to say you got it right in this one. It's we always had credit cards as the major problem, and credit card debt still is a problem. But last year, no, it was 2011, so a little more than last year, total student loan debt just surpassed total credit card debt. It's over $1 trillion of student loan debt now, almost an unimaginable number.
And I suppose, when I stop and think about it, college is so expensive now. Graduate school is so expensive. You can't get out of paying a lot of money, but that is a shocking number. And then the tough part is that the jobs aren't there for most college grads like they were when you graduated or I graduated.
Yeah, it is like a perfect storm almost, where the college tuition and expenses have gone up really double digits sometimes per year in a way that other things haven't. So they've really just increased in a way that's hard for students to have a sense of continuity with. And what are they going to do? In addition, then, there's been a hard economy for jobs. And Rutgers University, the State University of New Jersey, did a study not just of New Jersey kids, but of graduates of 2011, and they found that 50% of graduates with a 4-year degree didn't have a job 1 year later.
Ooh, and I know a lot of kids are moving back to live with their folks. That's a big number too. What's the average, if there is an average, is there an average college debt number out there?
Yeah, now there is. Turns out Minnesota's right in the middle of the country, so we're average for the average, no better or worse. And it's a person graduating with a 4-year degree averages about $30,000 of student loan debt.
Wow.
And of course, that's an average. So those who have no student loan debt means there's others who have $100,000 of that debt. And when you go into a graduate school, like you said, of law or a profession or something, it can be multiple hundreds of thousands.
It's just overwhelming, and it's, I'm sure, a big deterrent for kids who are borderline interested in college anyway. And then this would be a tipper for a lot of people saying, I don't think I want to incur that kind of debt.
Right, and that's kind of a shame, because student loans are really designed to allow people to go to school, and education is very closely associated with success. There's Department of Labor studies for the last 30 years that show people on average with a high school diploma make more than those without, and with a 2-year degree more than high school, and with a 4-year degree more than a 2-year. So education is personally fulfilling, and it's a good job investment, but we've now got the costs of higher ed spiraling out of control, and I hope we can talk tonight about ways that people can rein that in themselves. Maybe there's things we can do. We can't control tuition. We can control whether we live in our own apartment or not.
We do have a little impact, though, on controlling tuition via, and I don't know how much impact, but writing our state and our representatives and senators here saying, please don't raise tuition at the public schools. And I think some listen. What are some of the unique things about college debt? One I know of for sure is that you can't get out of paying it back, can you?
Yes, gosh, no. It's called a secured debt. Normally secured debt's things like a mortgage, where if you don't pay it, they take your house back or a car with repossession. But this is secured in a different way because it's government backed and it specifically cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. So no matter what your circumstances, they'll come for you and they can intercept your tax refund. They can garnish your wages from the federal government or the collectors for the government. They can do a judgment against your bank account. And frankly, they can take away your professional license if you don't pay these debts. So they're
Each one of those is a big threat, isn't it?
Yep.
At what point, Darryl, do they do that? At what point of you're not paying back?
Gosh, so usually it's not, of course, a quick jump to that, but the federal government does not administer its own loans in many cases. They're the grantor, but then once you have it to be paid back, they outsource that to a servicer. And the servicers, well, they're happy if you pay them on time, but if you're late one time, they'll charge you a late fee. If you're late several times, their policy may kick you into a whole different set of penalties. Can I give you an example?
Sure, I'd love an example.
Okay, so in the public loans, just being behind a month or two is not the end of the world. But if you're behind several months and they call you in default, at that point, going into that kind of collections in default, a collector can add 25 to 30% to the balance of your loan. So you thought you had a $10,000 loan, you instantly have a $13,000 loan.
And this could be after just a few months of being late?
Right, if you actually trigger the default, and that can vary among the loans. Usually it's not 1 or 2 months, but it's also not 10.
Right.
The other piece is private student loans, which are through the banks. They actually have adjustable rate interests, and so you might start out with a reasonable interest rate at, well, even 9%, but we've seen people be late on a student loan payment with a private lender, and it goes to 21% like a credit card. And then what you're doing is just paying the interest forever, as long as it takes.
Well, one of the things I read in preparation for the interview talked about a man who was in his 60s still paying back his college, loan. And I can see if your interest jumped like that, it could happen fairly easily, that it would last for your lifetime of work.
You're paying and you're just paying interest kind of thing, the way the worst of credit card defaults have that parallel process.
So even if you would declare bankruptcy, your student loan debt would not be canceled?
Correct. This law specifically excludes student loans from bankruptcy. So you're stuck, and that 60-year-old, I mean, remember that it's rare for a 60-year-old to be paying on their own college debt, or we have seen that, where they've just been paying and paying and paying. But remember, think about how many of our 60-year-olds are co-signed on their children's or grandchildren's loan, and if the child or grandchild doesn't pay on time, they're responsible. The debtors, the collector's coming for them too.
I saw some kind of sub-point about being a co-signer. And I mean, it seems like it would be something a loving parent or aunt or uncle would want to do, but it said be careful about that because it could affect your credit score. If you're a co-signer, the credit company could look and say, higher risk. And
For two reasons.
True?
One is if you're the co-signer, you may not know if the student isn't repaying the debt, and then you find out because you're the second in line and you go, oh my gosh, I have lates and delinquencies on my credit report now too because it's on both reports. And also the other piece is it does take away your capacity. So when you're buying a house or taking out a loan, they look at how much debt you have. If you're co-signed on it, they have to assume it's your debt too.
So what's a parent to do?
Well, I wish I had good advice for parents because it's all different. But
the pros and cons are pretty strong.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. A loving parent helps their child get their dreams, including going to college if they can. But I think it's important for kids to go to college with a strict budget and to shop around in the same way that you don't. A loving parent might help me get my first car, but they're not going to necessarily get me an SUV.
Right.
And so it's the same kind of major purchase quality. And we can talk about how to shop around a bit later.
Yeah, I want to get to that too. Anything more about penalties that we should know?
Oh gosh, yeah.
Because we know if we're late, we're in trouble pretty fast.
Right. So if you're late, you get that. With private loans, you get the interest rate jumping, and with federal-backed loans, you're getting that collector's penalties added. Just that, I mentioned that for most debts, when a collector comes after your bank account or your paycheck, it has to go through civil court. Think Judge Judy, and they have to say, Judge Judy, Darryl's not paying, can we get a garnishment of his paycheck? Okay. But because this is government-backed debt, they don't have to go through any courts. They just simply make it a fait accompli. And so we've seen people, for example, on very limited income like Social Security disability, someone living with $500 a month total income, and a third of that's been garnished because they didn't pay their student loan. So now that meager $500 is $350 per month or something.
And that's with a government loan.
Right.
So they can just go directly to your income source. Do they do that usually before they would take away your professional licensure standing, or
Right.
is there a pecking order, so to
That's a
speak,
great
of
question.
the
I don't know.
punishments?
I think that the kind of pecking order on the ground is that they'll first add collection penalties and they'll make collection calls to you, like a debt collector would do. But then they will move to the more aggressive legal action and think first maybe a judgment, which is bad for your credit and gives them the right to seize money in your bank account. And they'll move pretty quickly to a garnishment too. Maybe the last piece is taking away professional licenses and things. But
What about a couple who, here's just kind of a iffy, but a common scenario. Couple in their middle years, one has student loan, the other doesn't. They're married for years, then they get a divorce. Is during the time they're married, they're both responsible for that person's loan?
oh, that's a great
as
question.
a married couple?
A great question. No, if you're not a co-signer on it, if you and I were married and you're not a co-signer on mine or vice versa, then mine is mine and yours is yours, except in 7 states. In 7 states, they're called community property states. Minnesota's not this, but Wisconsin is. So in these
that's
seven states.
So our viewers in Hudson and western Wisconsin.
Yep, so if you're domiciled in and married in Wisconsin, then it's community property, and what's his is hers and hers is his, including the debt and including the assets.
So that's very important for someone to know when they're negotiating how they handle money in a relationship, isn't
right.
it?
But let's face it, no matter what state you live in, you want to talk to your partner about money and make a good plan together. And even if you have separate accounts, you want to both be building good credit. You want to both be building a savings and future assets for the future. And
But as someone who's done some counseling through the years, quite a lot, I think money is one of the hardest things for couples to talk about.
yep.
They often
And
talk
now
about
substitute the
everything
word
else
most
but.
important for hard. Money is one of the most important things for couples to talk about. Isn't that research that was there that a large number of us do get divorced ultimately in a marriage, and in America, and I think when they look for the reasons, financial conflict is often
I've
cited
heard that. It's
reason.
one of the top ones,
So
isn't
yeah,
it?
it really pays to open communication. That's open-hearted conversation.
Very good. If you're thinking about getting married, very, very good advice. There are a few exceptions to having your debt forgiven is it by both the government and a private loan by a bank?
Yep, good question. No, for private loans, they're private loans, and there is no forgiveness for those.
There's no exception.
Right,
Okay.
but for the federal backed loans, which is still the majority of loans, there's a cancellation option for disability and a forgiveness option for nonprofit work. So can I tell you about those two?
Yeah, I'd love to.
So if someone becomes permanently and totally disabled, there's a form that you can fill out on the website of ed.gov or the Department of Education's website, where you and your doctor both have to sign it saying this person is totally and permanently disabled, and then they can cancel those student loans. The only downside to that is that you can't take out new student loans then. You're done.
So, and that might be something someone who is disabled from one line of work might want to go back to school and get another kind of a line of work.
Right. So we should talk about the repayment plans, because there are some ones that even on disability income, very limited income, you might make an income-based repayment plan where the amount of payment is ratcheted down for now to just 1% of your income. So maybe that would be a way that if I were dealing with disability, that wouldn't shut the door on other loans. So that's the cancellation. And then
Right,
the
and then
other
the
is
forgiveness.
forgiveness. And forgiveness is that the government wants to encourage certain professions. And one of those is nonprofit work. So think a doctor or nurse or a pharmacist working in a nonprofit hospital in the inner city or on a reservation, or think a social worker doing Head Start or community action anti-poverty work.
Or work with the aging, or
Right, or working at a senior center. So many, many, many nonprofit kinds of jobs. The rule then is if you make a payment plan where you're paying each month on time for 10 years, the rest of your debt will be forgiven after 10 years of nonprofit work. And that's important because one of the payment plans takes a normal 10-year loan and extends it to 30-year term, which makes each month go down in the size.
Oh, okay.
So one good option is this extended repayment plan where it goes to 30 years. So then think 30 years in the back of your mind, but if you're working in a nonprofit setting and file for that and pay for those 10 years, the rest that you would owe for the remaining 20 is forgiven.
wow, that is something that I don't think has gotten much attention at all in
I don't
our
either.
media. That's a very important thing for anyone who's in the nonprofit world, isn't it? But you have to work, do you have to work steadily those first 10 years without break in a nonprofit?
Do you know, I don't know the exact rules, so I want to send your viewers right to the www.ed.gov, which is Department of Education, or later on, I know in the credits we have another longer website that has information, because the rules seem to change a bit on that. So I'd like your viewers to get the rights.
Assume it's the same today as it might be in 6 months, but that's a really good forgiveness option, isn't it? For those who are in nonprofits. Well, let's talk, we've got about 10 minutes left. Let's talk about avoiding debt, because that's for, as I said, those who are not in college yet have a chance to think hard about some ways to keep your loan numbers down. What's your best
Oh boy, I've got three I'd love to talk about.
Okay.
So one is PSEO. No one's heard of it, but it's called Post-Secondary Education Options. And it's an option for all high schoolers in Minnesota that if they want to, they can apply for PSEO, which means they take a college class credit for free while in high school. So how about that? Get some free credits while you're in high school and sample
from
college.
Any college, or are there just certain colleges that
Again, I'm
do
not an
this?
expert on this, so I think, maybe people should look and ask their college,
Talk
but
to your
I'm sure at all the
guidance
community colleges and state colleges, I'm sure that applies.
Okay.
So PSEO is a great option. Another is to start at, we were talking before, I'd start at a 2-year community college where the tuition is much lower. You get a chance to sort of grow up. I needed the first 2 years of college to grow up, and feel what your interests are and what you're good at. So that's a great way to do it. Start out with 2 years, maybe even just stop with 2 years if you have a technical degree and you want to get a job and go, that's fine, or see the world. But then you could go back and transfer many of those credits from a state community college or technical college. That's a great way to make it cheaper. And then
So you could save a lot of money for half, for those 2 years that you would spend at a bigger name school. And not all Ivy League, of course, is one category, but not all well-known schools pay back what one might think. I mean, when you're looking at resumes as a hiring person, I don't know how important the school is to most bosses.
I think it's an opaque decision. It's hard for students to know, is this an investment or is this just the college that seems cool? So we do want you to shop around, like any major purchase, a car, a house, an education. Shop around and ask and think about price. And think about, even if the price is higher, what's the financial aid package there, and is it grants, not loans? In other words, free, not debt. So I don't think there's one size fits all, but I think you're right about make this decision in a way that's not just about brand name. And I'll tell you my last and favorite piece, though, is the University of Minnesota has a program called Live Like a Student. in which they're really encouraging the social media program to encourage students to go back to living like students. Because it turns out, as the costs were rising, students were also having voluntary costs rise. So they wanted to live in their own apartment. They wanted a car instead of biking or using the bus. They wanted to have the entertainment and the furniture and the. So this is also a student's personal decision to say, no, living like a student means I am going to eat a lot of ramen noodles or macaroni and cheese.
I'm going to be more Spartan.
I'm going to live with, my friend Corey lived with 8 roommates in a large house, and their rent was nothing. And that was a way to not have student loan debt.
I also read that, thinking about this part of the challenge, that by living off campus, you don't have to get a meal ticket. That the article I read said $10 per meal on average campus meal plans.
Wow.
I mean, that's an expensive breakfast, a lunch. So living off campus and not getting the meal ticket that goes along with on-campus living.
Any way you
Could be
can
a
drive
good
it down, and plus that builds the skill of cooking.
Right, which is a good skill to have. What about, do you have any inside tips on grants? Because there are some grants out there too that are interesting and very, very positive and helpful.
Well, first is apply for financial aid early on in the process, so often in January, doing that and making sure that you don't wait till the end of the deadline. So apply early
because you've got a better chance than.
Yeah, there's some things that the colleges are giving away till gone, kind of like when you go to
that
Walmart,
makes sense.
supplies last.
They're not waiting until everyone's in and then dividing it up.
Yep. So apply early for what's called the FAFSA, the Federal Application for Aid. Also, there are many scholarships that aren't in the student loan package or the student aid package that you can apply for privately. So you
So
can.
where do you find out about those?
Well,
Darryl?
Google searching something like scholarships.com or scholarships application, there are hundreds and hundreds. And so if you have any ethnicity, there's a great way to just write an essay about what it means to me to be a college student who's blank. There are things around your interests, future physicians of America. There's things about patriotism. There's things about, so there was a guy, Benjamin someone, I forget, who went to Harvard, he applied for 30 scholarships outside the financial aid package. He applied with 30 different essays, and he got 10 or 15 of those guys. I mean, so there's lots of scholarships out there to research.
And now with the internet, I mean, finding those is easier than it was years ago. We've just got a few minutes left. You said to me earlier you had a great story about ways that your office works with people who are dealing with debt. Do you want to give us
I sure do. I'd love to tell you about this. So briefly, like all financial counseling, it's non-judgmental. It's helping people face the facts. So what's your budget? What can we do? And people walk out with an action plan. It helps instead of putting your head in the sand.
Right.
So we had a freshly minted child psychology graduate from one of the University of Wisconsin schools, and she was 22 and really ready to go in and help kids. But she had $44,000 in student loans for the feds, $18,000 in private student loans, one of which was defaulted, so that terrible interest rate, and her parents had a parallel $44,000 in plus loans.
I'm doing the math here, and it's not a good number.
It's ugly. It's triple-digit ugly. And so for her, a child psychologist starting out is not going to make much. So we helped her and her parents. We met with both, and we decided she had to drive down all her expenses to almost nothing. So she went and lived in her parents' basement, and they decided for 3 years, while she could aggressively attack these, she would live in the basement. We helped her get the private loan out of default by calling the lender and saying, what would it take to get back on track? She did this extended 30-year piece with the federal loans, and her parents were so tickled that she handled all those that they said, we'll pay the plus loans for the 3 years it'll take to pay off these private loans. So I share that story because it's a story of inspiration and hope that even when you think the numbers are against you, you'd be surprised what we can do if we pull together. And some of that is really getting some expert coaching and not putting your head in the sand.
That's a great story. And I think the tendency for a lot of people would be to say, oh my gosh, I'm just going to have to chip away at this and feel kind of psychologically burdened for years and years and years, and financially burdened. Well, I want to be sure we give you some good information for following up on some of the ideas and wonderful suggestions Darryl has. The first is a website that he highly recommends, and it's www, and it's a long one here, studentloanborrowersassistance.org. So check that out. We'll put it on the screen here. And then if you want to learn more about what they are doing at Lutheran Social Service in Darryl's department or Darryl's program, call 888-577-2227. And then your website is conqueryourdebt.org. So 3 good things to note and to jot down. Well, thank you so much. I've learned a lot. I've been taking some notes here as we're talking to pass things on to younger friends and relatives. I guess there is just a real need to be realistic, to talk, to plan, to not give up.
Yeah, and college should be a happy experience. What a thrill to be able to go to college and look at career, and we don't want to have our youth burdened by things. So again, like so many debt issues, please make a plan. Try not to take on too much debt, but no matter what you have, there's no shame in it. Just face it, make a plan, and with a little bit of sacrifice and a good plan, you can get out of that problem and move on with your life with your degree.
Well, on that positive note, we need to say goodbye, but thank you so much
Thank
for
you, Mary.
coming down again. Thank you for being with us. I'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week.